Hello and welcome to The Modern Consultant. I'm your host, Mark Aarons, and on today's episode, I have the pleasure of hosting Bhushan Sethi. Bhushan is a partner at PwC and also an adjunct professor at NYU's Stern School of Business. And on today's episode, we talk about it all. We talk about how AI is affecting enterprise-level clients, mid-level, mid-market clients, also small businesses. We also talk about bigger issues that are affecting our society today: racism, classism, and everything in between. We talk about the pandemic. We talk about business, leadership, and ethics in the time of artificial intelligence and what we can do as a society, as citizens in a society, in a global society, to be able to architect a better tomorrow. We talk about quite a bit, things that neither of us have ever shared on any podcast anywhere. And I hope you enjoy this episode as much as we enjoyed recording it. And with that, I look forward to seeing you on the other side. Bhushan, I just want to say welcome onto the show. It is a pleasure to have you. And one of the things that I really appreciated, you shared a lot before we actually hit the record button, working with Fortune 500s. But there were a couple points in there about just how you grew up and how it's shaped who you are as a person here today, which I think personally would give a lot of color to everything that we speak about here on AI. And so for the people who don't yet know who you are, how would you tell us? Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. Really delighted to be here, and thanks for the opportunity. I grew up in a very humble beginnings in North London to Indian immigrant families, middle-class parents, well-educated. But in that time, it was really hard to get good jobs. So father was an electrical engineer, and my mum was what we would call in the States a paralegal, kind of, for public sector. They really focused on education like every good immigrant family, and that was kind of our route to everything. They encouraged us to be curious learners, and I've been a consultant for 25 years. I left the UK at the turn of the century. I've been in the US for around 22 years. I just got my American citizenship a few weeks ago, which I'm excited about. But what I do right now is I help companies address kind of business problems around the areas of strategy and organization and helping them transform. Some of that's around technology, some of that's around creating new value, some of that's around taking out costs in a responsible way. But the humble beginnings and the curious learning and the thirst for kind of being a global citizen really helps me in my professional and personal life. And I'm really excited to kind of engage in this dialogue and kind of hear from you, because you're your own global citizen, and we have some similar stories in terms of our journeys as well.
That we do. And to, just dive into the deep end, the topic that, of course, is on everyone's mind is artificial intelligence. November 6th, OpenAI releases this big update, and I'm curious, you have this perspective at the enterprise level, and beyond. Just how are people responding to it? What does it mean?
Yeah, so there was obviously a significant news event that happened in terms of, the CEO structure, and who knows where that lands when this episode gets aired. But obviously there's some change in terms of the CEO ownership of OpenAI and the kind of the links of Microsoft. But more broadly, AI has just been, over the last 11 months, just a phenomenal case study in terms of how this has gone from a consumer experience that literally everybody is talking about ChatGPT and using it kind of on their personal devices, to corporations and all the major tech firms having their own version and saying, how do we put this in the hands of enterprise users? So real people doing real work in both knowledge-based industries and others, and to say, how does this fix the lessons of history? All the many other kind of productivity promises through technology, whether it be cloud, whether it be automations of different kind, haven't yielded the benefits. This is a great hope for us. It isn't without its challenges, both in business and in society, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But just the momentum around this and the excitement from all types of people and the ability to correct some of the historical lessons of technology has just been amazing to be part of. Our clients are excited. Everyone's out there talking about this, thinking about their own experiments and their own use cases and how it can actually drive both top line and bottom line benefits.
Speaking of which, I was listening to one of your earlier talks, and I think there was a number that you shared about what the opportunity looked like financially with artificial intelligence, and that was pre-ChatGPT. Was the number like 15? How much was it?
15.7 trillion by 2030.
Wow.
It's interesting. We came up with that stat in 2018 where we looked, because AI is not new. Gen AI is a new phenomenon, but
Yeah.
AI of all different kinds, we see it in driverless cars. We see it in the maps that we use on the navigation systems. We see it in financial advice where we kind of have assisted, like robo-advisors they're called, kind of helping portfolio managers kind of make decisions about their customers' kind of asset allocation decisions. So we've seen it in various forms. So yes, we put that stat together in 2018 using a similar method to kind of what others have done to say, let's look at the jobs, let's look at kind of what can be automated and what that actually does for an economy and how it can actually grow GDP. Because if you grow GDP, all boats rise. You can actually create jobs, you can actually provide healthcare, you can actually provide education, wherever you are in the world. And so that definitely gets a lot of attention. But like any good plan, it's all about the execution. So I
Yeah.
think lots of people are marching on to thinking about for their company what the benefits are and obviously what the associated risks are.
I think that's wonderful because calling back to a theme that you shared just a little bit earlier around, well, you didn't use these words exactly, but I'm paraphrasing my interpretation, and the democratization of the opportunity that technology brings to the world. One thing that I've personally had a semi-selfish interest in has been just what new opportunities it could present to, I don't know if we're still using this terminology, but third world countries. Like I'm from Jamaica, and I've always wondered, like, what would it take to be able to open up new economies and help individuals, and then, like you said, raise the GDP. Rising tide raises all boats, and to just have that positive impact on the world around us. I want to use that as a springboard to dive into a potentially controversial topic that we were speaking about before the recording, which is just you growing up and what it was like for you being an immigrant in the UK. And, as you mentioned, like you'd even gotten beaten up growing up.
Yeah, like any person from the Indian subcontinent growing up in 1970s and 1980s England, we were not as accepted. And it wasn't just us; it was kind of other races as well. But there was a huge introduction of people from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh in that period of time, and the integration was a challenge. I lived in, my family moved out to the suburbs of London when we were 5 years old. They were one of the only few people of color in the neighborhood. So, our music, our dress sense, the smell of our food kind of was all different. And there were challenges. There were challenges in the playground, at school. There were challenges when we tried to kind of integrate into society. There were challenges for my parents in the workplace. And this wasn't, bias. This was straight up racism. This was straight up go back to your own country, etc. The really sad thing, Mark, is we're seeing aspects of that come, over COVID. We've seen that happen in London. We've seen that happen in the US. Like the racial hatred from certain small, very, very vocal pockets, both online and offline, is increasing. And it really scares me as a parent. It scares me as a business leader. It scares me as a taxpayer. As a citizen of a couple of countries. And so I grew up that way, and sometimes I really worry that some people want to bring us back to that way. And we've got to figure out this how to coexist, and we've got to embrace diversity. But frankly, that's why I live in New York. I think it's the most diverse, accepting, accommodating, exciting place in the world to raise my kids.
I relate. I haven't shared this story before, but when I first immigrated to the United States, it was undergrad. I was working I was a research assistant to a co-investigator on a Harvard-led research study. And we were going into Gadsden County, Florida, one of the most underserved and economically impoverished counties in Florida at the time. And part of our study was the choice study, the Center for Healthy Options for Innovative Community Empowerment, if I'm remembering it correctly. But essentially, there was high levels of lead that were in people's homes, particularly elderly populations. And we wanted to use a specialty X-ray device to be able to detect those levels of lead. And so part of that meant recruiting people for the study and essentially door knocking. And part of that led me into some more rural areas of the community. And, I knew very little about the tangentially, just bits and pieces of the United States. And then I remember I had door knocked, and after I had door knocked, I saw this Confederate flag. And I was like, oh, and then the dogs let loose. And then I started running as fast as I could to basically get out of there. Thankfully, no racial epithets or anything were, thrown my way. But it's been, I've never forgotten, and I've always had this undercurrent of being aware of what my surroundings were like in the United States, because that could happen. And then of course with George Floyd and just all the different events that have of course taken place since then, I think it underlines the need for more tolerance and even going beyond tolerance to perhaps empathy and compassion, to be able to make space not just for one but for all kinds of people. And tying this into AI and the future and the transformation of business, I truly believe that businesses can be a vehicle for positive change in the world, and part of that on a ground level would look like making sure that AI data sets that they're trained on are, remove some levels of bias from that. Is that something that you encounter or advise on with any of your clients?
Yeah. I like the segue from chasing dogs, from the dogs chasing you, to responsible AI. That was skillfully done, by the way, sir.
Thank you.
It's a really important point that, there are some very public cases around, tech firms and their hiring practices and using AI and only coming up with, white men who play lacrosse called Jared. And thinking about kind of, that should be, that's why, we struggle to have, enough women in tech. But in terms of responsible AI, our clients are really trying to understand, what does that mean? How do we have in something called the large language models, which is the data that feeds the Gen AI, how do we actually have a diverse data set, whether we're in law enforcement, whether we're in the mortgage business, giving loans, whatever business we're in. So how do we make sure we have a diverse data set and have checks and balances there? But also, how do we have a diverse set of developers thinking about these use cases, thinking about, if we want to think about our emerging customer segmentation of small, medium enterprises that are diverse owned, whether that's Latino or African American or kind of another diverse segment, how are we actually bringing product designers that reflect that lived experience, that are kind of understanding that customer or user base that you're designing for? So it's not just about data, it's about developers. And that's why it's bringing all people to kind of, whether you're prompt engineers, whether you're coders, and not just diverse by skin color, diverse by something that's a real challenge in this country, socioeconomic. Because income inequality is one of the scariest things in this country right now. Like, my story of the 1970s England was based on race. We have huge, and we've seen this grow, the huge divide between the haves and the have-nots, based on skills, based on socioeconomics, sometimes based on location, based on education, but it's growing. I see it growing every day. You look at the markets, you look at the big companies, you look at the small companies, there's a bunch of people living paycheck to paycheck, and everyone else seems to be living their privileged best life. And that's a really kind of scary topic. So responsible AI is really important. But for me, responsible business is the bigger issue. Like, people talk about, and you've talked about, purpose and profits. Like, we've got to, if we want to be business leaders and leave a sustainable kind of world to our kids and future kind of stakeholders that inherit the earth, how do we have sustainable business? How do we not just use all the resources and think about kind of short-term profits quarter to quarter? How do we actually think about sustainable progress for kind of business and society? So far beyond responsible AI.
I love the extension of that from responsible AI to responsible business and creating a better, ultimately, society, a global culture where, it's beneficial for not just people at the top, but every which way. And
we're sounding very woke, both of us. I think we need to deal with that. Like, people are going to people are either going to turn the volume up or turn it down right now. But I don't think we should apologize for that. I think certain words like woke have been hijacked, but we're trying to bring compassion and kind of a sense of responsibility to things that we can control. We're both in the business community. We can control that to some degree. So,
So that's a great consideration. And so I want to thread this needle with two topics we were talking about before, because it's like there's the issues of society with racism, and what I'll summarize the financial ism as classism, and finance then of course plays into that, but then also particularly there's this culture online right now of if you mention anything progressive, there's a section of the internet that will want to label it as woke and basically use it as a means of dismissing any underlying arguments. And I push strongly back against that because the underlying, regardless of someone's political affiliation, if we blanket dismiss arguments, we are essentially being destructive, not constructive. And there is a culture that I think exists online right now where it is anti-cooperation, not cooperation as in business cooperation, but people collaboration is probably a better, more accurate way to describe that. And if I could put anything onto the internet, I would want people to seek and find ways to collaborate more, because it's only through collaboration that we're going to be able to solve the greatest challenges of our time. And it's a bit of idealism, but, if you don't set an ideal, then you don't necessarily have a worthy goal to work towards. It's not going to be perfect, but at least you have something to move in the right direction. And that's how we then begin to start to tackle issues of climate change and, ethics of artificial intelligence and humanitarian values and such as well. But that's my soapbox.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is, how can reasonable people engage in a debate without it becoming ridiculously polarizing and us kind of retrenched to, I'm a climate denier, or you're a socialist because you want everyone to have universal health care. But in reality, we're both trying to say, we both have needs from certain positions, and we want a kind of a sustainable future. We're expressing them in different ways. I'm really glad that social media wasn't around when I was a teenager in my early 20s, because there's people like me that would have been radicalized, and there's disinformation flying around, and whether it's about elections or whether it's about racial hatred or other levels of intolerance, geopolitical aspects. Like, it's so easy for young people to kind of find what they want to find on the internet and take a position and just not engage with the other side. Online, offline, it's really sad that a lot less people are actually meeting in, offline places, bars, restaurants, football places, churches, religious places, etc. And so I think that the core is we all need to kind of remember things like respect and tolerance. But again, I'm calling myself out here. In my teens and my 20s, I was much less tolerant and much less respectful than I am now as a 50-year-old man, that I kind of, have to. And so I just worry for the young people today and how they're going to kind of learn some of that, whether it's from the home, whether it's from friends. But online communities are really dangerous in terms of exacerbating existing stereotypes, and disinformation is really the cancer that drives that.
So to take it from the societal level back to the level of the individual, because one of my personal beliefs is that leadership starts with the self, and part of that is sometimes gifted to us through our parents. And so I'm curious, how, if any, do you talk to your children about, leadership? Is that something that even like comes up?
Yes, and I force them to sometimes watch my podcast as well. So when they're watching this, I think it really starts with being comfortable and confident in your own skin, feeling like incredibly safe that even if you screw up, or the worst thing that can happen is, you might get a bad grade, you might lose some money, you might lose a year if you take the wrong courses, etc. But like, your parents will still love you, and God willing, you'll still have like a roof over your head and kind of food in the fridge. And so it's really giving them that security, and then also recognizing that my children have privileges that I never dreamed of as a child. We live on the Upper East Side. They take nice vacations. They go to good schools, etc. And so it's really remembering that they are very fortunate, and so it's building compassion. And so whether it's kind of the love of self, being confident in your own skin, feeling safe, feeling compassionate, and then using your advantage in a good way. So one of the things that really annoys my kids is I tell them that relationships are really important, and I sometimes call it networking, and to say that you should actually ask an adult when they come to dinner kind of their views on the world, or you should understand more about AI. You should understand what your friends are doing in coding. You should understand if their parents, have a job that makes them travel around the world, what they do. And so I just want them to be kind of curious, but also understand that relationships in the world of AI, in the world of business, in the world of technology, it's your relationships with everyone in society, from the janitor to the CEO in your company, to your clients and your vendors. It's those relationships that'll pull you through, and it's relationships that people will remember. It's not how well you put in technology. It's not how much profitability you drove in a single quarter. It's not even how much of a pay rise you gave someone 1 year. It's going to be how you made them feel, how you showed up for them when they really needed you, how you treat them when you're rising up the rungs in the corporate ladder, and also when you fall down, because typically those people might pass you as well. And so I just think that relationships learned from an early age is critically important. But again, I learned lessons the hard way, and I learned kind of the tough way in terms of really hard feedback in a corporate setting. So I'm trying to give some of that to my kids, but it does start from kind of really focusing on kind of being confident in your own skin.
That is sage, and I could also see a tall bar for a child to live up to. But the way I relate to that is actually I was I think it's like around somewhere between the 8 and 13 years old, and I was driving back from my dad's office. He had like a little blue Volkswagen car, small town doctor, Ultra Jamaica, only doctor in town, that sort of thing. And he said this thing that just like stuck with me for the rest of my life, which is he believed every generation should do better than the generation that came before. And it wasn't an imperative, but I heard it and it just really landed with me. Now, at that time, I thought to myself, I was screwed because this man is an MD PhD and he's the first bioethicist in the Caribbean. So how the hell am I going to top that? But it was it definitely inspired me to do more. And I have another question for you, but I wanted to pause just in case there was anything else you wanted to share on that.
Your point is like the classic immigrant story, but if you look at the economics now, this is the first generation where in the US, younger people are doing worse economically than their parents. Think about the cost of healthcare, the cost of education, the rising costs of housing. It's really hard as a young person to actually get on the property ladder and follow the American dream. So whilst we all aspire for that for our children, I think it's like it's getting harder back to the income inequality and kind of the wealth gap. It's getting bigger in this country, and inflation and policy and divisiveness are not helping at all.
The environment has become more challenging, and that's a perfect segue to what I wanted to ask you about next, which is there any overlap between the advice that you find yourself giving to your kids and the advice that you find yourself giving to clients in navigating the difficulties that we're seeing in this world?
I think all of the advice when we're helping companies transform their businesses, all the advice around what they're doing from a people component, how they make people feel, how they get people to adopt new ways of working, how they demonstrate new behaviors around curiosity, collaboration, how managers need to understand that psychological safety is important for their workers, because no one can be their best self at work if they're living in fear, anxious about their job, or feel that they've got a boss who's just, intolerant of them, whether it's based on race, sexual preference, etc. And so on the people aspect, absolutely. Well-being has been a big topic through the pandemic, Mark. All kinds of well-being, physical well-being, emotional well-being, financial well-being. I think that's as relevant to how we explain that to our kids, that they need to get off the couch and exercise, how they manage their money for those that kind of have pocket money, how they manage their mental health. It's as important for our kids as it is, CEOs and people in their first job.
What would you say has been more challenging for clients that you've worked with? Trying to navigate the pandemic or trying to navigate all of the changes that are coming out with AI?
Oh, goodness. I think the pandemic after the first few months was much more straightforward. And why do I say that? First, everyone was in it together. Every country, everyone was in it together. We seem to have much less divisiveness. Let's just talk about the US as the US, etc. And then, in different parts of the US, they reopened and it was dealt with. Work from home, regardless of what you read in the media around every, CEOs in areas where I consult, like banking, want to go back to the old world. Work from home has been a huge success. Like, we've done things where now people are 2 to 3 days back in the office, but you would never have even believed that back in 2020 at the start of the year. And so the technologies work, the banking systems have worked, the stock markets have worked, we even got vaccines, etc. So, but this challenge around AI is just, I'd say that's the challenge, but it's also the economic challenges that we have right now. And the things that drive the economic challenges, which is geopolitics. Because the economic challenges of reshoring your supply chains and not manufacturing in China, if you take that extreme example, is a huge economic issue. If we all have to pay 2 or 3x for our products that we love and can't live without because we can't manufacture them in China, or if we don't have the chips to put in the products, that's a big issue. And so I think this confluence of geopolitical tensions, trade wars, etc. Obviously the terrible war in Ukraine, drove rises in commodity prices, oil prices, etc. But if we don't have kind of the semiconductors, the chips, if we don't have access to quality manufacturing in places like China, it's going to put a huge economic strain on us. And technology can be some of the only levers that you have to drive out productivity and actually manage costs as a business. And so it's not just AI and am I going to lose my job? It's, how do we think about production? How do we think about costs? How do we think about prices that consumers will pay? And, we've had globalization for a reason, because it absolutely makes sense in terms of it drives economies. It can actually work and be a codependence that everyone benefits for. We just need to probably turn down the volume on the tensions and the threats around this stuff. But our clients are worried about that economic uncertainty, the geopolitical aspect, and also they want to be the right side of how they use the technology in a responsible way and drive the productivity gains, back to what we talked about earlier.
So speaking of economic uncertainty, I could hear people listening into what you just shared and thinking to themselves, yeah, globalization, amazing at the macro scale, but do countries with smaller GDPs get left behind? Do smaller businesses get left behind because they don't have the economies of scale of maybe, mid and enterprise level businesses? But you've also shared that you work with small businesses as well. And so what advice do you provide to them to be able to stay competitive and for them to also experience some of the growth that come with technological changes like AI?
Yep. I mean, small businesses are going to be there. Like if you take the US, there could be huge growth through the small business sector, through entrepreneurs, through technology startups, think about the service industry. How much are we spending on services right now? Whether it's in the kind of the cosmetic industry, everybody wants to look good. The fitness industry, everyone wants to kind of work out and kind of buy that bike or actually go to those fitness classes, etc. We're traveling a lot more post-COVID, and again, it could be luxury travel, it could be simple travel, but there's a lot more kind of, you think about small businesses that could be adjacent to things like travel, the travel industries. And so, small businesses are going to kind of be the lifeblood. They can be nimble, etc. But they've got to figure out like how they use this technology as well. How do you use AI to really understand kind of your customer needs? How do you give customers new experiences around travel that they haven't yet thought of, but you understand more about them? And to say, Mark wants to actually go to a couple of national parks this summer, but it's really difficult for Mark to envision how to bring a couple of kids there. Or if he wants to bring his parents there and drive around and kind of, is there access there? Or is he worried about access to healthcare, et cetera? And so there's an opportunity there for small businesses. But you think at the macro level, I don't actually think it's about the GDP. It's about looking forward for these countries to say, am I going to grow my economy through services or products? Do I have access to talent? Do I have a demographic dividend like they do in Africa and like they do in India? Or do I have an aging workforce like I do in Japan and Korea, where they have to literally net import talent, and digitize workplaces because there isn't enough people to do the work? And so I think people have got to look at it through kind of their workforce, what's going to drive comparative advantage for them around products or services, and then how they use the rest of the world. There's a reason why a lot of service centers exist, not just in tier 1 cities in India, but in tier 2 and tier 3 in rural cities in India, because they have a very educated young population. A lot of them are English speaking or can learn to speak business English for a call center or a service center or an IT development center. And so it's looking at all of that together and to say, where can I actually think about accessing talent virtually in different parts of the world? So I'm very bullish on globalization as a solution. I just worry that we've got some rogue actors, some world leaders, and some misinformed parts of an electorate around certain countries that are trying to take a very nationalist agenda. And it's kind of very scary and concerning, but I think we'll come out of the right side of this, because ultimately I think the business community can drive this, create economic outcomes for people. The dignity of work's really important, and that can fund everything else that we need, a functioning kind of law enforcement, healthcare, and education system.
Building on what you just said, I would also share with anyone listening in, just from my own experience of working with almost exclusively small businesses and startups, is actually something that you and I were talking about before we hit the record button, which is connecting on the basis of values. And I was sharing this with my team on a call prior to this, where if we start connecting on the basis of values, it cuts across socioeconomic, hierarchy and all of this. And just within what you shared with, looking at globalization and, as tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities, if in the hiring process, you're also then checking for whether or not someone, shares your values, then you don't just have this opportunity to, okay, find a win-win financial situation for everyone, but you also have this opportunity to create this humanitarian impact within the organization and through creating whatever products and services that you also, provide to the market. Question for you. When it comes to AI, something I've shared with my clients is when we're thinking about startups and everything, there's generally like 3 phases that we're trying to get in place. Infrastructure, to start, and then we're typically wanting to increase the capacity of the existing systems, and then we're usually wanting to then increase the throughput through those systems. When it comes to AI, how do you see it affecting the creation of infrastructure? Does it create more infrastructure, or does it, would it help more with capacity? Would it help more with throughput, or all of the above?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with the throughput. One of the biggest constraints that we don't talk enough about is their lack of computing power if we all wanted to use large language models and AI. I took an excellent class, and this is not an advert, it's just a fact, at Stanford during my sabbatical this summer. It was called AI Strategy, AI for Strategists and Innovation. And we had these amazing kind of speakers who had started their own firms. We went to the Stanford lab, we looked at driverless cars. We talked about the regulatory and the legal framework. But the lack of kind of computing power is going to be a constraint. So you can't use use this level of kind of AI and kind of looking at the large language models, etc. There's also a lack of data. So the large language model, things like ChatGPT, is an open source piece with data that's provided by you and I. Companies aren't going to use that. They're going to use their own private language models that they have to kind of feed the beast themselves. And so that's kind of happening now. And as we said, as you said earlier, that training data needs to be debiased, needs to kind of represent the diversity, etc., and needs to kind of be continually maintained. So that's exactly why it's so early stage, and experimentation is the big buzzword from businesses right now. Use cases, companies saying, how do we use this in our policy administration in insurance? How do we use this in HR to automate the generation of an employee handbook or changes to it? How do we use it responsibly in the recruitment process? How do we give predictive measures to our consumers to say, based off of what you purchased here and what you liked, you might like these other products, and we could wrap some services around it. So it has huge utility, but right now it's about experimentation so that our clients can think about what are the revenue and the kind of cost outcomes they can really influence. But there's a constraint around the data, there's a constraint around computing power, and at some point this topic is going to have to intersect with ESG, because ESG is about looking at our emissions, whether it's our personal emissions, our emissions as a company, and not to get too technical, but there's commitments that firms have made around Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions within their ESG disclosures public companies have. And so if you're going to be using all of this computing power and driving up your emissions, you're going to have to say, do I choose carbon footprint or do I choose productivity for AI? We know business people want to use productivity, but at some point there may be a bigger tax on some of the kind of the decarbonization and the emissions agenda. So that's why it's really hard to make those decisions now. It's going to depend on regulation. It's going to depend on kind of what we see in terms of technology innovation, the availability of things like semiconductor chips, and the results of some of these experiments. So we're really early stage. And so firms, we're just going to have to watch this. But it has, like we said, it has huge positive consequences if only us humans designed it in the right way. And personal opinion, welcomed some checks and balances around regulation and the right legal framework, which is where government have to play a role. We cannot leave this just to the business community. And again, not everyone will agree with that. My friends in the business community and my colleagues, but that's a personal opinion. I've kind of seen too much of kind of just leaving this up to businesses, and there can be unintended consequences and maximizing kind of short-term returns.
I do agree, and am an advocate for having sensible regulations in place, because ultimately regulations function as boundaries, and without boundaries, things can go awry very quickly. And what I heard within what you shared is that AI is going to have a positive impact on throughput, assuming that we're able to figure it out to get it right. Another one point of clarity for the person who might not be familiar with the term, what does ESG stand for?
Environmental, social, and governance. And so The Economist wrote a really good article about this, I think, last year, to say we should actually think about those terms separately. Because social goals are things we talked about earlier, to say, do we have good jobs and employment? Do we have a diverse workforce? Do we kind of care about things like, education, etc.? The governance is really, how boards and management kind of make those decisions kind of while thinking about sustainability. And the environment piece is the piece I talked about before, to say, as we are developing our business and procuring products from the earth and processing them, etc., or as we are producing our driverless cars, what are we doing to the economy? What are we doing in terms of the emissions that we're creating? Are we using fossil fuels to develop our carbon intensive products, etc.? And so firms have to now disclose what they're doing around that. There's gender pay equity rules around the S piece in places in Europe. There's them in the emissions pieces, etc. But there's a whole view that says this is incredibly politicized. There's a bunch of businesses that are disclosing because they have to, and there's a huge backlash against ESG, and just to say that it's too cumbersome, it's everything and nothing, and it needs to be kind of embedded more into specific kind of business decisions about product design and investments, etc. And so it's definitely something that people should be kind of reading about and saying, how does it relate to my company? What are we disclosing? What are our views? How do we think about it when we design products? How do we think about it when we engage with vendors, etc.?
We could do an entire podcast on just that piece.
And I'm not an expert on ESG, but I think that everyone needs to build expertise on these important topics at a base level. And the good thing today is there's so much access to resources that we can all be curious learners around new topics.
I absolutely agree. I don't know if this has ever come up before this now, but I have more than average exposure to that thanks to my degrees in environmental science. So I very much relate to working with companies that do have an active interest in, even just, noting what might, removing externalities, that would have a negative impact on the environment for the sake of increasing the bottom line. I think we can actually do both. We can have a positive impact on the environment and also still grow profits and also do good for humanity as well. Might be idealistic, but if we don't aim for it, then we'll never get there. Follow question is, I was talking with a friend of mine. He's done over $1 billion in sales in his former role at Best Buy. And one of the things that he said to me that just stuck with me is that all businesses are trying to do three things. They're either trying to make money, cut costs, or save time. Do those priorities change for the different kinds of clients that you work with at enterprise, mid-market, and small business levels?
Cut time and cut costs. There's obviously a bigger cost base in larger companies, and so that's kind of one area. I think we have to unpack the making money piece. So you can make money by kind of producing a set of products that meet a certain need for a certain period of time, and kind of have outsized returns. And then when there's an innovation that happens, or a change, then, you're going to have to reinvent, that business model. So if you're producing, something to meet a healthcare need, like in the times of COVID, like a vaccine, and then COVID's gone away, and you've got to kind of think about protecting that, how you're going to kind of reinvest and think about, replacing that revenue. That's kind of an important point. But I think all businesses are thinking about how do we make money sustainably? And again, I'm not being woke and just saying that this is about purpose. Full-blooded, red-blooded capitalist companies need to think about how they make money to say, what are the products we're providing? What is it that we can differentiate to our customers? Can we gain a bigger share of wallet? Can we wrap services around these products, etc.? But that all does relate to, do we have quality products? Do we actually understand our customers? Do we have good data, etc.? So there's a lot under the, and do we have a good reputation when things go wrong, when there's kind of service issues with our products, or when there are kind of quality issues with our products? So there's a lot under the making money piece. But yeah, saving costs, saving time is one of the areas that firms can control right now, and they're focusing on that to the extent that they can.
I just want to thank you for helping me to win an argument that I've been having with him, because I said we could add a fourth one, and now I'm going to tell him that Bhushan agrees with me, and I'm going to go back and say we could add a fourth one, which is make an impact. So awesome. I'm down for this. I just want to say that you've been very, very generous with your time and just your experience and philosophy. I have just a few more questions, and this next one might be a difficult one. I just want to give you that a preamble there. If you were stuck on a desert island with one dessert for 1 week, which one would it be and why?
Does it have to be a dessert?
It does. It does.
Stracciatella ice cream.
That was very specific. I love it.
We like ice cream. My kids and my eldest daughter likes ice cream. We like stracciatella. We went to Italy for Christmas, so I think we're eating it every day. It's good.
No,
It'll be
awesome.
hot on the desert island, I assume, and there'll be a refrigerator.
Yeah. It's in this dream scenario, we'll make it happen. We'll find some solar panels.
Question.
I try to prep people, because that's the setup for the more difficult question, which is, if you had to choose between oatmeal raisin cookies and chocolate chip cookies, which one and why?
Oatmeal raisin, because I'm going to pretend that they're slightly healthier because of the oatmeal. And it's probably not true.
That's great. So my dad is the same way, and I think I learned it from him. Like I'm really into soft oatmeal raisin cookies, and about 80% of podcast guests seem to prefer chocolate chip, and they will die on that hill apparently. And there's like just a few who are like, well, do you know there's actually chocolate chip and oatmeal raisin that you can find when you want? I'd be like, oh wow, yeah. Have you tried those? Have you seen those?
No, not the mixed ones.
Okay, well, next time you happen upon a grocery store, definitely check it out. Maybe try it with the kids. But the semi-final question that I have for you is, if you could go back in time to Bhushan before the world of consulting, knowing everything that you know now, what advice would you give to yourself?
Be kinder to yourself and be kinder to others when you're kind of growing up in the industry. When you've got your first management job, don't expect everyone's going to be able to think the way you do, be able to kind of analyze data, understand that different people kind of get there in different ways, or never get there, or just have different hidden strengths that you can't see and are very different to yours. And also kind of be kind to yourself. You don't have to work ridiculous hours. You don't have to accept some of the unconstructive feedback that you get from bosses or people that treat you in a certain way that, again, you wouldn't even think of in today's environment, because business has moved on and society's moved on. But I think it's that, and I think that's a good recipe for kind of business leaders today, especially those in a position of leadership or privilege. To say, like, are you bringing enough compassion? Is compassion something that you're pushing for your 18-year-olds, your 21-year-olds to actually bring? It's not all about proving yourself and kind of the the macho culture of business, 18-hour days and 5 days in the office, etc.
Well said. And thank you for sharing all of this and all of you. This has been fantastic. Where can we find out more about you?
Well, first of all, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. It doesn't feel like work. It actually just feels like it's fun and it's a little therapeutic, going down memory lane and then looking forward. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on X. As you'll see, like I take LinkedIn really seriously. I think it's really important to have a point of view on certain things. If I can be helpful to people to formulate their own thoughts, I get a lot of very nice feedback from non-clients, especially younger people, that they really enjoy the stuff that I share, and kind of things like this that I put out. And so that's really there. And, I publish a lot and speak a lot over the years, and to the extent that people find that interesting, you could see some of that on my LinkedIn feed as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for checking out the show. If you liked it, go ahead and hit the like button and also subscribe so you don't miss another one. It also tells us which ones that you like the most so that we can then do more interviews like that. If you want to go from idea to implementation, though, especially if you're wanting to productize your expertise so that you can scale your impact on your clients and, of course, grow your business, then join our email list. There, we're going to talk about how modern consultants can productize their expertise so that they can have a greater impact on the world around them and live life on their terms. If that's up your alley, I hope to see you on the other side. Talk soon.